story we will discuss tonight, Sleeping Beauty in the Fridge, is a part of a lesser-known collection of short stories that is now for the first time available in English in its original form. It was published in 1966 under pen name of Damiano Malabaila, and only a few years later was republished under Levi's name. In these 15 stories, together with another collection called The Flaw of Form, Levi delves into the question of the ability of science and knowledge to improve human life, but also to alter it in ways that we may not understand and destroy it. Levi was a scientist, and the scientific view of the world is key to understand his choices and his questions. In his early writings relating to the deportation and extermination camps, he analyzed technology and science at the service of war and death, and the notion of industrial killing and the factory of death. He ended his only novel with the sight of the atomic bomb. When he returned to life from his experience in Auschwitz, Levi not only understood the importance of preserving the memory of these experiences and those events, and the importance of sharing them, but also asked what connects the society in which he lived before and in which he lived after the camp to those events, which is our society. In this story, he turned to ordinary life without war and persecution, and trying to see if the same agents that produce catastrophes operate in shaping the human condition in ways that appear benevolent, but may not be so. I will give a few details on the story, whose protagonist, Patricia, is a young woman who elects to become part of an experiment. In the year 1975, she undergoes a freezing process and to be preserved beyond the limits of human life. The story takes place 150 years later in the apartment of a descendant of the scientist who first conducted the experiment, and who is also a scientist and her custodian. In 150 years, Patricia only aged 1 year, and she was defrosted once a year on her birthday or to witness major historical events. Needless to say, she became the object of the scientist's sexual attention and began to harbor the desire to escape. The setting of the story is the party, is Patricia's birthday, and the scientist who is the great-grandson of the man who originally froze her. He is hosting the party, has the refrigerator in his apartment. He and his wife are expecting guests. Apparently is a novelty item. The frosting of Patricia is a novelty item, and everybody has expectation to be invited to this party. And so the story goes. And then
I'll take it from there. Two of the guests, two young people who are fidanzati, engaged, arrive, and the young man falls in love with Patricia, which is a rather bizarre situation. What is it? It's Peter, right? Peter? Yes.
No, Baldur.
Yeah?
His name is Baldur.
Baldur. Peter's the host. Yes. Baldur makes a plan with Patricia that they will escape that night. He will take his fiancée home, and then he will come back and get Patricia, who will be safely defrosted, and they will escape together. But when he comes back, Patricia says, who is defrosted, says to him, "Look, I'm really sorry that I got you to break up with your fiancé, but I'm actually not going with you." And she tells him that she has used him to get out of there. To me, this play is interesting, partly because of what Primo Levi said on the TV, that while it deals with a very serious moral matter, after all, Patrizia is a victim, as one of the people said. In fact, she's a very amoral and naughty girl. And the play is a very funny play. As I was saying to Natalia Indrimi before, it reminded me a little bit of well, it's a social comedy, and it reminded me of the government inspector, Gogol. But everyone in the play is either fatuous or morally compromised in some way. And to me, what is charming about it is the pull between this rather horrible moral circumstance of this woman being used for a science experiment and being frozen, and the social comedy that transpires around her. Levi is very artful. He made a little protest in there about how this was a work of art, but rather than just a work of instruction. But it's very wonderful if you read it to see how what a wonderful little play it is. How Patrizia is mentioned. The play begins with a speech to us, to the audience, by the hostess, Lotta, saying, "Oh, here I am. This boring event is occurring again. These people are coming over. I have to have this stupid party." And she uses the name Patrizia twice, and we don't know yet who Patrizia is, and only slowly is it revealed what the situation is. And there's also a very strange situation, a psychological situation, in that everyone in the play, other than Patrizia, is living in real time, and I think the year is 2112 or something like that. And Patrizia is living in a different time, and she's awakened only on her birthday, and for sporting events and for her major crimes, he says, and she was awakened once for Tristan and Isolde for 6 hours. So what you have, as I said, is this rather eerie, it's science fiction, it's a rather eerie and horrifying circumstance of a woman frozen in a refrigerator, and around her is going on this very traditional and classical social comedy. The ending, I'll read you the ending later as we go on. I want to pass it to Paola Mieli now, who will talk about her view.
Paola Mieli has written a long essay or short book that Centro Primo Levi has published and is available here for those who are interested, and deals in a very original way with this story that has in fact been the object of a literary critic for many years. But I think her interpretation is quite new and interesting.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank very much Natalia and Alessandro for organizing this, the Centro Primo Levi and the Center for Fiction. So thank you very much for inviting me to this. It's difficult for me to summarize in a few points some of the things that attract me most about this play. I just want you to know that this play is actually one of the 3 plays that appear in the book by Primo Levi that is called A Natural History. Okay? And that, of course, is translated, and you find a new translation in the complete work. And I highly recommend you to read it. It's though a very particular book. Let me just say that I want to give you just a few references regarding the book. It collects short stories that were written by Primo Levi between 64 and 67. And the title itself, as you hear, Natural History, is very peculiar for a collection of tales that Levi himself, you just heard him, qualifies as so-called science fiction, right? And we find two very interesting references. First of all, L'Historias Naturalis, right, is, as we know, Naturalis Historias is a reference to Pliny the Elder, right, who had written, as we know, many books on this. But the exergue that Primo Levi puts in natural history is coming from Rabelais, and Rabelais was a dear companion of Primo Levi. He was carrying it with him very often in his trip. For instance, there is a reference where he says, "I'm moving to Milan to work, and I'm carrying my Rabelais." And it's interesting because Rabelais, in this reference that Primo Levi makes, speaks of l'enfantement étrange et contre nature, the birth giving that is strange and against nature, and makes a specific reference to Pliny's stories that appears, is actually the 7 books, and that is the one that is specifically devoted to human behaviors, to the range of different human behaviors. And as we know, Plinius is an explorer, an observer of all natural phenomena. So this is the premises that Primo Levi makes in, giving us this title, Natural History, for a series of plays that refer, to science fiction, but it's a particular science fiction. We're speaking about a collection of 15 stories. 3 of them are plays. Some of them are extraordinarily funny, Actually, one of them, that let me just mention to you that I don't know, unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to read it in English yet, in the new version, but there is a story that is just one of the most comical stories ever, written. That is the Versifier. Versifier is basically a story of a machine, a poet that needs to, because of his own business, has the necessity of writing poems, and is sick and tired because it doesn't have inspirations, and is offered a machine that produces poems in its place, right? So this is one example. I would say that is the most comical, but obviously there is also an irony also in the Sleeping Beauty and the Fridge. And we can say that, the irony is definitely one of the elements that we can see coming through Levi's writing, that is always, extraordinarily marked by his conciseness, his precision, his rationality, his economy. It's always, he says actually that he needs to, always find the right word for each thing that he's trying to convey.
I just wanted to ask you on this point. You wrote your book on the anchor of irony in the story.
Yeah.
That interestingly enough, all translators have missed. Has been translated mistakenly in known languages, in fact, and in all translations. Exactly because it's a type of irony that is sometimes difficult to follow. maybe you want
Yeah.
to.
So I'm going to tell you what is this about. So, in the Sleeping Beauty in the fridge, the first scene, so that you have Lotte and Robert that are waiting for their guests, and there's the first couple of guests that arrive, and Lotte enters into the scene, and she wears a magnificent silver fur. And Robert immediately says to him, "Oh, what a beautiful fur!" That, of course, Lotte envies immediately, right? And actually, is Maria's husband who replies, "Well, this is a silver Martian." And is not as uncommon now, since the Russians have put it in the market and everyone can buy it, right? A silver Martian, okay? Of course, is ironic, but you hear immediately also, the strength of this irony. Curiously enough, has been translated both in the previous translation of the Sixth Day and Other Tales that was done by Raymond Rosenthal in 1990, has been translated as Silver Martin. Of course, this Martin is an animal, right? And unfortunately, I have to say that the same mistake is being reproduced in this new edition. So, obviously, the Silver Martian, it's very strong, it's very typical, it's really, I would say, the signature of Levi's writing. Insofar as, in a very ironic and subtle and very simple manner, is introducing specifically in the everyday tran, dandrum, etc., the horror of consumerism, alienations, desubjectivization. Obviously, who is a Martian? Is it a he, a she, an animal, a thing? Obviously, the Martian is by definition what is radically other. What brings about immediately to stage, the radicalness of Levi's, Levi's subtext, right? That is a remark on colonialism, on exploitation, on subjugation, and of course on desubjectivization, and cannot not bring to mind what Levi says about the usage of the bodies in the camps. That is very sad, but I'm not going to quote here. We are very well aware of what happened to the human's body in the camp, right? That they were totally mercified. They were transformed into an object of consumption, right? So I think, though, that this, how can I put it, oversight, should I call it an oversight in the translation? Should I call it a mistake, whatever? Should I call it a misunderstanding? Whatever it is, brings me to something that I have to thank Sheridan Hay, novelist, for sending me this morning the New York Review Books, review by Tim Parks on Levi's work. I cannot, of course, spend time to discuss the entire review. I just want to read you a quote that refers to the natural histories, okay? Reading through them, I'm astonished at the fall-off in performance. It's not that they are badly written, but there is a frivolity, a childishness almost, that strives for but never quite achieves comedy. Essentially, they are science fiction pieces in which the twin fears of sexual experience and invasive personal power structures play out in a wide variety of paranoid fantasies, but without the urgency or commitment that might really involve us. I have a hard time reading it because I'm so stunned by this reading that it was basically published on October 20, 2015, because it's definitely saying something of I can put it, it makes me think of what I just heard Primo Levi saying here, when he says that he assumes that the reader of his plays is un lettore volonteroso, right? That I don't know how to translate into English, but a willing reader and not a lazy reader, right? I really think that it's beyond my understanding. How is it possible for someone to approach the entire body of the work of Primo Levi, but especially this, thesis in this manner, which misses completely the point, right? So this is just to say that I really strongly believe, and that the argument that I'm making in my short essay, that what Levi, as we heard, is doing here is really, establishing the continuity between past aberration and present normality. This is what he's doing, right? And he's doing in a very subtle manner and in a very smart manner. It's definitely true that when you approach these tales at first, you are, a little bit stunned, right? That you are displaced from certain regular expectations of the readings of a play, right? But what he established, and maybe I not have to. I was thinking, really thinking about coming here and speaking about Levi. What can I say? Probably I share something with him. That is the interest for science. Obviously, also because of my own, formation, because of my own interest. I'm also coming from a scientific environment, and I think that what really emerges in Primo Levi, who of course refers to science constantly, because he was his humor, his constant reference, his training as a chemist was the most important thing in his life, and definitely affected also his style. There is not one of these tales that doesn't make a reference to chemistry in one way or the other, right? But the question is criticism of science, because obviously he, in his love for science, found himself in a camp seeing the aberration, the application of the aberration of science. And I would say that all the short stories in natural history are all, pointing to the aberration of science, in science, and the continuity of this aberration from the time of the application of science for extermination to the present application of science for segregational purposes. All sorts of segregational purposes, including medicine, pharmacology, and etc. Can I quote one thing that he says regarding this? In 1981, which is pretty late, he participates to a debate on science over the responsibility of the scientist in contemporary society. And he writes, addressed to the scientist, "Do not hide behind the hypocrisy of scientific neutrality. You are gifted enough to know how to evaluate whether the egg you are hatching will release a dove or a cobra, a chimera, or perhaps nothing." So it's a very important point that is also, an ethical call for the sciences, but I would say not only for the sciences. It's an ethical call for every human being that is participating, in the normality, quote unquote, of the everyday life, and embracing without reflection, the very alienation that is part of, and that is basically, assenting to. In other words, is a criticism of the, how can I say it, the acceptance of what is called normality, right? And the complicity that this acceptance brings about to, the horror of the past and the present, which, of course, it sees a very strong continuity between one and the other.